For our next session, we will have a panel discussion on sustainable finance. The panelists for this session are Ms. Fiona Reynolds, CEO of PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment; Mr. Jose Ricardo Fagonde Forni, Chief Financial and Investor Relations Officer of Banco do Brasil S.A.; Mr. Kanetsugu Mike, Member of the Board of Directors, Chairman of Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group; Mr. Alberto De Paoli, Chief Financial Officer of NLSPA. The panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. Tamao Sasada, Country Executive for Japan, Bank of America. Over to you, Ms. Sasada.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this panel discussion in sustainable finance. My name is Tamao Sasada, Country Executive for Bank of America in Japan. Today, I'm honored to be joined by senior leaders from around the world. Ms. Fiona Reynolds, CEO of PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment; Mr. Ricardo Forni, CFO of Bank of Brazil; Mr. Alberto Di Paoli, CFO of Enel of Italy; and Mr. Kanetsugu Mike, Chairman of Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group. Our four speakers are not only well-respected leaders in their business fields, but they're also pioneers in sustainable finance, which is a key component of the net zero transition. Finance is an important aspect in achieving sustainable society. With our speakers coming from different regions and industries, today would be a great opportunity to hear progress in sustainable finance around the world and some of the changes required as transition accelerates in coming years. Without further ado, let me jump into the first topic. So, first of all, I would like to ask all leaders to share their initiatives and challenges to date on sustainable finance. So let me start with PRI. Fiona, I understand.
Sorry.
Hi. Okay, so I understand that PRI has been promoting sustainable finance by encouraging investors to incorporate ESG into their investment decisions. I know that you now have over 3,500 signatories to the PRI principles. So can you tell us why the PRI has been so successful in pushing this initiative forward in the investment community? And how do you think investor behaviors have changed over time?
Well, thanks, Tommaso, and thanks for having me here today. It's a good question. Just maybe for those that aren't familiar with the PRI, just really quickly, so we were formed in 2006 out of the UN system by a small but committed group of 86 asset owners who were really aiming to bring sustainability to capital markets. And today we now have, we're actually over 4,000 signatories to our 6 principles, and they collectively represent 121 trillion US. And this includes 94 signatories in Japan. So over the past 15 years, we've really been working hard to bring responsible investment into the mainstream arena. And while it's been a long road, I do have to say that each year we've seen more and more momentum with a real leap in the last 5 years. Also, in the wake of the pandemic, we've seen increasing recognition from investors that issues such as climate change, human rights abuses, and inequitable social structures seriously really threaten the long-term performance of economies, investors' portfolios, and the world into which, of course, their clients and their beneficiaries live. So really, investors' understanding of both environmental and governance indicators and their materiality has really improved, and investors have also, really moved to integrate those indicators into risk analysis and screening. So we've just kept working away. I think that's why we've been successful, and we've been developing the practice. In terms of what I've seen, what still needs to happen, what's yet to be done, I talked just about the environmental issues and the governance issues, but I would say that social performance considerations, or the S in ESG, have often really still been missed as either immaterial or less a priority for many. But I think COVID-19 has really shown us the interconnectedness of issues, and it's demonstrated the materiality of social issues, human rights issues. And really from the investor perspective, from our signatories' perspective, we've never seen them so engaged on social issues. And we hope that this is something that's here to stay. You know, really as an organisation by and for signatories, our role is to provide investors with the tools, the guidance, the reporting structures to actually know, how do I go about incorporating ESG factors? It's one thing to talk about sustainability, but how do you actually do it? And that's where we come in. I also think because we've got such a big, broad signatory base, it also gives us legitimacy and credibility to engage with policymakers. And we've certainly seen that sustainability is really increasingly being included in financial regulation. So we've really come a long way since 2006. And it's sort of taken 15 years for responsible investment to truly enter the mainstream. But we still have a long way to go if we're going to shape a more sustainable, green and just future. So we've come a long way, but there's a lot more that needs to be done until we can really say that responsible investment is integrated into all portfolios.
That's excellent, Fiona. Thank you so much. So now let me ask Ricardo. Ricardo, we understand that Bank of Brazil is ranked number 3 in the 2021 Global 100 Index. So that makes you one of the top 3 most sustainable companies in the world. So can you tell us some of the highlights of your achievements? And also, we understand that one of the main customer sectors for Bank of Brazil is agricultural. But Brazil is also an industrial country, and it's rich in natural resources. So how do you engage with those sectors from a sustainable finance perspective?
Okay, Fiona, thanks. First, I'd like to thank the organizer of this event for inviting Banco do Brasil. It's an honor to speak together with such distinct speakers at this panel. For us at Banco do Brasil, it's a great pride to be acknowledged by market indexes, rankings, and global ratings as one of the most sustainable banks in the world, like the Corporate Knights Global 100 ranking. In this regard, it's important to highlight that Banco do Brasil has a long track record on the subject and has been integrating for many years the ESG aspects into our corporate strategy and into our administrative and business practices. I would like to highlight some of our initiatives that has contributed to our performance. We have a sustainability governance in place. Since 2005, we have had a sustainability plan that has 40 actions and 110 KPIs effective until 2023 and is aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This year, we went further, establishing 10 long-term sustainability commitments with goals to be implemented by 2030, which involve 3 work fronts: sustainable businesses, responsible investment, and ESG management. We also have allocated 261 billion reais in sectors of the green and inclusive economy, which is considered the largest portfolio of sustainable business in the Brazilian financial system, with a growth of 16% in 12 months, mainly due to its performance in sustainable agriculture and social businesses. As the main financer of agribusiness in Brazil and supporter of the sector throughout all the stages of its production chain, we have achieved a balance of approximately 100 billion reais in low carbon agriculture and good social and environmental practices. But we want more. We intend to reach 125 billion in sustainable agriculture by 2025. In addition to providing farmer customers with solutions to help preserve the environment and reduce carbon emissions, our business also brings social benefits. This agenda is very important for Brazil and is in line with our commitment to eliminating social inequalities. We provide specific credit lines to support family farmers and rural producers in sustainable forest management projects and in adequacy of recovery of degraded areas or areas of permanent preservation. We seek also to help our clients from all sectors of the economy to transition to a more sustainable portfolio and engage in ESG practices. Our sustainable business portfolio comprises the financing of activities and segments to have a positive social and environmental impacts, such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, construction, sustainable transportation and tourism, water, fishing, forestry, sustainable agriculture, and waste management. And this is based on a methodology developed by the Brazilian Federation of Banks and following our sustainable finance framework, prepared in accordance with the main international standards. I think that's it for this question.
Thank you, Ricardo. That's great. So now let me ask Sugu of MUFG. So Sugu, in May this year, MUFG announced its carbon neutral declaration, which is a commitment to achieve net zero emission in your finance portfolio by 2050 and your own operation by 2030. You're the first Japanese bank to have announced such a commitment, which is really encouraging. So would you be able to tell us about MUFG's sustainable finance initiatives in light of the current situation in Japan?
Well, thank you, Tamao, and thank you very much for inviting me to this summit. First of all, regarding today's main theme, net zero, I'm extremely encouraged by the fact that the Japanese government has declared its commitment to achieve carbon neutrality. Showcasing this bold new dimension of Japan's investing environment today is a powerful act. A quick refresher on my company. MUFG is a GSIB, one of the world's largest financial groups, with more than $3 trillion of total assets and a global network with 2,600 locations in more than 50 nations. Our core is commercial banking based on mid to long-term, high-touch client relationships, and we offer a wide menu of financial services, including trust banking and securities. MUFG has a cumulative target by the year 2030 of around $350 billion of financing that supports a sustainable society. This emphasis is not new. We've been a major finance force in renewable energy and ranked among the top players in the global league table for a very long time. Now we are taking it a step further. To increase the level and the speed of our measures to address climate change, in May, we pledged to support global decarbonization by achieving a net zero emission in our finance portfolio by 2050 and in our own operations by 2030. That said, we cannot reach net zero through our finance emissions on our own. Divestment may be one way to achieve this, but that in itself will not necessarily lead to carbon neutrality in the society as a whole, nor be MUFG's options as a leading bank. Our focus is for all our clients and Japan as a nation to achieve decarbonization as a whole. In the process, balance with the economy is a key, and a stable power supply is a prerequisite for sustainable economy. In Japan, we have issues like resuming nuclear power operations, geographical constraints to renewable energy, and the difficulty of sharing electricity with our countries because we are surrounded by water. So it is also important to support our clients' transition to green, in addition to supporting technology innovations to decarbonize. And for Japan, it is particularly important to support companies who want to turn green, even if they are considered brown at present. The key is to provide financial support for the massive capex required for changing industrial structures, and this will be a significant business opportunity for MUFG.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sugu. That was great. So now let me turn to Enel. So Alberto, for Enel, you are a front runner in the global energy sector in terms of transitioning from fossil fuel to renewable energy. You've also been a pioneer in sustainable finance because we know you issued the world's first sustainable linked bond in 2019. So can you share how sustainable finance has actually helped you with your transition?
Well, good morning and thank you for the question. Yeah, so we invented this new instrument in 2019. So I give you some color about this invention, and so the historical situation at the time. We decided to change completely our business model in 2015 and turning our business model into a full sustainable business model, and pretending to find in this U-turn so economical reasons, strong economical reasons to have this change, and it's something that we found along the path. So at the time, this company worth 35 billion euros. Today is 80 billion euros after 5 years, and this is the half of this value is explained from the choice. We decided to have a sustainable finance supporting this transition, but at that time we had only one instrument in the market. It was the green bonds, and we issued 3.5 billion euros of green bonds. But after this, we asked ourselves if another instrument may offer different solutions for a full sustainable company like us, and we didn't find any instrument in the market. So we were seeking for an instrument not related to projects and related to the strategy and purpose of a company that may cost less than the normal bond, because sustainability has to be backed by better financial instruments with lower cost than others, and not on the other side to support the transition and not only focusing on specific projects, because we think that the energy transition is a revolution, and you can name a revolution project by project. You have to have supporting the path of the transition, because nothing was present in the market at the time we invented the sustainable linked bonds. That is exactly as this characteristic, and we tried to have a discount on our normal bond issuance, and we got it. We got it because we offer the market companies, sustainable companies looking forward with a more profitable share on one side and less risk, and we sold it. Now, and after these, three main important things happened. One, the ECMA standardized the instrument. The second, now the instrument is becoming mainstream, because today we have 50 billion euros of issuance already done. And the third is that now is becoming so mainstream, also in the fact that it's supporting the transition, and also the central bank, European Central Bank, now is starting buying this instrument. This is the final package of this new instrument, and we think that will help this path, because sustainable finance has to provide solutions, because all the companies at different stage with different target may offer and may be backed in their path to reach the sustainable targets that we all have as inhabitants of this world.
Thank you, Alberto, for sharing your journey in sustainable finance. That's amazing. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to move on to the second topic, the future. So the transition path to net zero will be different depending on the industry, region, the nature of the business, and the time scale. So I'd like to ask each of our speakers their views on how companies can accelerate this transition and how they think sustainable finance will play a role. So again, let me first ask Fiona. So Fiona, many investors still focus on short-term gains rather than having a strategic dialogue with corporation to understand the long-term transition. So how will you encourage more investors to responsible investments? We know for sure that will help the company to speed up their transition. And also, as I mentioned, the transition path will vary depending on the sector, the various factors. So how will the PRI principles evolve to address these differences in transition?
Yeah, okay, so I do think that this is happening. I mean, I'm not saying that all investors are actually engaging with companies about their long-term plans, but I certainly think that a lot of PRI signatories do. And really, you know, since our founding, the external environment around us has continued to evolve significantly. So we've seen the adoption of the Paris Agreement, and we've seen the Sustainable Development Goals adopted, as well as really, you know, evolution in terminology, in investors' expectations and practices. So investors are thinking, you know, not just about the returns for their beneficiaries, that's obviously their job, but they're also thinking about the world into which their beneficiaries live and want to retire. And we're really building the work to help them do that. And so while we've really come this far in integrating ESG factors into investment practices, much of the focus of our work going forward is on building the responsible investment practices for the future. So to support meeting the SDGs, investors really need to understand how they can increase the positive outcomes of their portfolio and decrease the negative outcomes arising from, you know, their actions and their investments. So increasingly, we're seeing investors really recognising feedback loops between the real economy and financial markets, where the outcomes they shape directly impact the risks and the opportunities they face. And by really considering those real-world outcomes alongside risk and return, investors play a really important role in addressing issues that seriously threaten the long-term performance of economies, of their portfolios, of companies making up that portfolio, and of course, as I said, the world into which their beneficiaries live. So really to help our signatories better understand how to shape these outcomes, earlier this year, we launched a 3-year strategy that's under the theme of building a bridge between financial risks, opportunities, and real-world outcomes. And in this strategy, we're really looking to help those signatories seeking to understand what good practice looks like, how to integrate and measure outcomes, while remaining, of course, firmly grounded in their fiduciary duty and the broader role they have in society. I think a really great example, if I can have one, of investors shaping real world outcomes and really moving the dial in sustainable finance is the UN convened Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, which is a leadership program that was put together by the PRI and UNEPFI, whose members have committed to aligning their portfolios with net zero by 2050. And they've also had to have short-term targets. The first is 2025. And, you know, this group has got so far just over 40 of the largest pension funds and insurance companies in the world. And they really recognise that they're not only vulnerable to the systemic disruptions that climate change will unleash on ecosystems and societies and economies, but also that they've got a role to play in catalysing decarbonisation of the economy and investing in climate resilience. And of course, given the scale and the challenges that we face, investors can't do this alone. So they need to be working with the companies that are in their portfolios about their plans and their objectives and how they're transitioning their companies. So the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance also recognises that it's not just working with business, it's also working with governments. We need governments to set strong roadmaps about the actions that they're going to take so that investment can flow and that business brings about change. And increasingly, that dialogue between business and investors is ramping up.
Excellent. Thank you, Fiona. So let me now turn to Sugu of MUFG and ask a little bit about the situation in Japan. So Sugu, many Japanese companies are trying to come up with a transition plan, especially after the government announced the 2050 net zero target. So how do you think Japanese financial institutions can support this transition? And do you see any challenges, and how will MUFG address them?
Well, first of all, I agree that transition paths to net zero will vary. And indeed, demographics, economic maturity, industrial structure, natural resource reserves, current energy mix, and the geographical requirements for renewable energy. These are all different everywhere. So I would say each local, regional, and national transition is going to be unique. Japan, for instance, as I mentioned, has distinct issues with the nuclear power, expanding renewables, and sharing electricity overseas. The situation is quite similar throughout Asia, where demand for electricity continues to increase. Therefore, simply resolving to pursue green may not be enough for successful decarbonization. Well, it is essential for government, industry, and the financial sector to work together in a mutual trust with a real understanding of what makes each region unique, including its industrial profile and its time horizons. So, as a responsible financial institution, MUFG emphasizes engagement with the stakeholders in order to support smooth decarbonization. In line with this concept, our designated team for customer coverage and providing solutions is already in dialogue with industry groups and government agencies, as well as engagement with 60 of our top priority corporate clients. We all want a transition that respects each client's circumstance, and MUFG knows we bear a huge responsibility in this regard. We also have to be mindful of greenwashing and take measures that consider global standards as well as the perspective of stakeholders, including those of environmental NGOs. As a start, each nation needs to develop a transparent, predictable, and a credible plan that reflects its own institution, own situation. On the other hand, financial institutions need to develop disciplined dialogue with the clients by assessing whether the client's approach is truly consistent with the Paris Agreement. In light of a proper assessment of the transition efforts, the Japanese government has taken a step toward this, with guidelines clarifying the concept of transition finance related to climate change based on international principles of the International Capital Market Association. According to the guidelines, financial institutions in Japan should not only focus on the individual projects that need funding, but also comprehensively consider the transition strategy of the borrower, including its credibility and transparency to implement its proposed green strategy. Such transition strategy needs to be based on the scientific evidence, which can refer to sectoral roadmap currently being developed by the Japanese government that should also be consistent with the Paris Agreement. I hope such roadmaps will reflect Japan's uniqueness and at the same time be well received by various global stakeholders.
Thank you, Sugu. That's great. So let me now ask Ricardo about the situation in Brazil. So I believe Brazil will still need to rely on natural resources such as oil and iron mining as the country continues to grow, right? So, but I also understand that Brazil is making progress in renewable energy. So my question is, how do you strike a balance between the environment and economic growth? And in light of that, what do you see the best transition pathway for Brazil, and how will you support the overall transition for the country?
Tamal, thanks for the question. The financial sector plays an important role in the allocation of resources in the economy, as banks plays a leading role in the growth process of the productive sector and direct the necessary capital for business development. By considering ESG aspects in the business strategy, the sector can bring new financial instruments to the market such as equity for new technologies, emissions trading platforms, and green loans, taking advantage of the new value-sharing opportunities. We want to help our clients in this transition to a low-carbon economy by offering sustainable products and services and spreading good ESG practice throughout the value chain. Some of the main initiatives are: we launched an exclusive credit line for individual customers to finance up to 100% of the value of solar systems that reached a balance of 6 billion reais in renewable energy financing. We want to reach a balance of 15 billion reais by 2025. We also made a new consortium group, green groups, for the acquisition of goods aimed at the efficient use of natural resources and low carbon emissions. 10,000 consortium quotas were sold, totaling more than 700 million reais in sales volume. It's also a part of our corporate objective to gradually reduce the exposure of the credit portfolio to high and medium impact sectors, while recognizing the challenge and needs to each one of them. Banco do Brasil has sustainability guidelines for credit for 10 sectors of the economy with the higher possible environmental impact, such as agribusiness, civil construction, and electricity, among others. The guidelines set conditions and address strategic issues such as the biodiversity and climate change. For controversial and emissions-intensive sectors, such as oil and mining, Banco do Brasil finances projects that follow the best sustainable practices and in line with international agreements and that aim to preserve the environment. We require proof of environmental regularity from clients throughout the term of the deal, and all transactions have contractual clauses with the prerogative of suspending the transfer of funds or early maturity of the contract in event of a non-compliance with social environment requirements. In relation to agribusiness, we require extensive documentation to ensure social environmental regularity of financed projects and mitigate illegal deforestation. In the case of operations in the Amazon biome, we are even more restrictive. Banco do Brasil is aware of the relevance and urgency of the issue of climate change and the importance of engaging governments, the private sector, and society in efforts to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. And that's why we are committed to helping our clients in the transition to a greener portfolio and with the leading role that Brazil can assume in this issue. Yet, from our own operation perspective, we have established a commitment to reduce direct emissions of greenhouse gases by 30% by 2030 and to reach 90% of our energy matrix generated from sustainable sources. We have already 2 solar plants in operation, and we will have 4 more plants starting to generate energy in 2021. What we cannot reduce, we will compensate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your explanation, Ricardo. That's really insightful. So lastly, Alberto, for Enel, I understand you will further increase your sustainable finance to 70% of your total funding portfolio by 2030. This reflects your funding strategy being aligned with your ESG perspectives as part of your corporate strategy. So what expectations do you have for financial institutions and investors?
Well, so we work under a framework that we call the sustainability as value. That means that sustainable choices will have to create value for the company that is choosing this business concept, and for all the stakeholders that are involved in the action of the company. We work in the energy sector, and we know that the most we are discussing about is related with the problem of how we produce and use energy. So we defined our new business model around the concept that, one, we have to decarbonize all the production, Second, we have to upgrade and digitize all the infrastructure used for the electricity. And third, that every one of us will have to use only electrical power for final uses. This is our perspective and our business model. And you understand that when it comes to show to investors the value for us, for Enel, to stay in such a business, I think is easy to understand. Because so every one of us talk about the net zero target, but I think we don't know how many electrical power will have to be used in a world at net zero. There is so incredible increase versus what we have today, and those are the markets in which we act, that some markets are so incredible big and huge in the future that we will not have any demand problem in the foreseeable future. And also, we will not have any competitive problem, because the more we will be in this sector, the best will be for the world. So this is an easy concept to say the value creation. On the other side, we have a problem, or say, an important things to do to show how the value will be spread throughout all the stakeholders. And I think every one of you know that making all our consumption of energy consumption by electricity in the future will bring a saving that is in the range of 30–40% of the spending that we are doing today for the same use of energy using different funds. So this is something that is a value, like the value of the GDP increase on the other side, like the value to have no pollution, like the value of the health value, of all the values that we will bring in this transition. This has to be evident for everyone, and evident means that it has to be measurable, and you have to have good stories around it. And the good stories is the company may create big values, and consumers will make big savings, and the economy will work. So this is the way in which we think every one of us will have to conceive in this concept. And that's why we said the first thing we have to do is to show the world that we can create value, because we think that is the first. Say, there are not guys that are choosing sustainability because it's green. They are choosing sustainability because they are choosing the way to create more value. Our company doubled, tripled the value. This is for me a good sign to say to everyone making these choices is creating value for all. So I think this has to be an economical and financial concept that will have to be more understood in the future, because this will trigger and gather other behaviors. And so creating the SDG 17 on cooperation to push forward so the transition and to go in the new world.
Thank you, Alberto. Well, thank you, everyone. It's just been so insightful. But maybe to conclude the session, I would like to ask each of you, maybe 2 minutes each, if you have any further thoughts that you'd like to share, such as your vision as a leader, or more generally, any message you'd like to share with the audience today. So maybe I go with Fiona again. Fiona, first.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, I agree with much of what's been said. Look, I think from the investment community, we need to see them step up and do more. So investors, in their role at the top of the investment chain, really, they have leverage. They have leverage with companies as the major shareholders, and they need to be using it. And they need to be doing their part to make sure that we do have this transition to, carbon neutral, and as well as protecting value, as Alberto was just talking about, along the way. So this needs to be a partnership with business and with government. And I think if we think about climate change, if I could use just a very quick example, we can see that investors are demanding more from companies, and they're trying to make sure that their voices are heard. And if we look at the 2021 annual proxy season, it was really unprecedented, with record number of climate and environmental related shareholder proposals. We're part of Climate Action 100 Plus. It's the biggest ever investor to corporate engagement, 570 investors, 54 trillion in assets under management, and 3 clear asks that we want to make sure that boards have a strong governance framework and they're thinking about climate change and they've got oversight of it. We want them to reduce emissions, set their net zero target and tell us the pathway, and then report to us in line with the TCFD. And if we just look at the shareholder proposals I was talking about, frustration from investors because some companies are just not making that transition. So we saw a dramatic shake-up at Exxon, where a majority of shareholders voted to replace members of the board. We've seen at Shell that a Dutch court has ordered them to reduce emissions by 2030 and cut CO2 emissions by 45% after engagement with investors, but also some NGOs who brought an action. And then meanwhile at Chevron, at their annual general meeting, we've seen investors also voting for reduced emissions. So really, in short, investors are stepping up, and I think and they want to work with corporations who are bringing about change, and where they won't, investors will take further action and vote with their feet.
Thank you, Fiona. So maybe next to Ricardo.
Thanks. Over the last few decades, social environmental subjects have gained ground among the main concerns of global leaders. This uneasy is growing among a new generation of business leaders who are truly aware of these issues. They know that if they do not act, they will not only be putting their profits at risk, but the future of their companies. They know they need to take a stand on this theme, and they are trying to find the best ways to do that. And the reason is because behavioral changes are becoming increasingly visible. Young people are very attentive to the social and environmental aspects of what they buy, and also consider these criteria when choosing the companies they work for and which they will interact. Society has been pressing the governments to adopt stricter regulatory standards. Investors are increasingly demanding about the performance and the disclosure of ESG information. We understand that a culture of sustainability is essential for companies to be able to identify and manage the current and future risks and opportunities and generate value for their stakeholders. Being clear about the challenges that are presented to us and the position we occupy is decisive for us to achieve more positive results and commit to this new global development agenda. Here at Banco do Brasil, we have a purpose, which is to take care of what's valuable to people. Despite all the progress already made, we are aware of the challenge that ESG issues represent, and that therefore we are attentive to the path that Banco do Brasil needs to take to foster an increasingly sustainable economy. Finally, the message I would like to leave to leaders is to consider ESG issues in the decision-making process. We certainly need to generate value to our shareholders, but we need to go further. It's necessary to generate value for all our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. So maybe to SUGA, please.
Thank you. As Tamao referred in her first question, MUFG is the first Japanese bank to declare carbon neutrality and take part in the United Nations-led Net Zero Banking Alliance. We know the importance of promoting this aspiration on an ongoing basis and will expedite concrete measures to formulate the 2030 target by the end of next year to fulfill our commitment. Our efforts will be focused not just on Japan, but globally. To hand over a sustainable planet to future generations, the time for action is now or never. It is essential for each party to fulfill its own role. Industries have started to undergo structural changes, and the governments and the central banks are creating frameworks to support climate change activities in the private sector. Climate change, in fact, will be discussed this year at the G20, G7, and the COP26 platform for global coordination. These are all good developments, but we also look forward to seeing a globally harmonized framework developed for the most fundamental disclosure standards. So let me close with this. You may have noticed that MUFG has recently stated our corporate purpose as being committed to empowering a brighter future. This applies to decarbonization as well, and we pledge support for world movement toward carbon neutrality by applying solutions we have in our strengths. We want to work with each of you and look forward to creating a sustainable world together as a team. Thank you.
Thank you, SUGA, for your strong and powerful message. That's great. So lastly, to Alberto, any message for the audience, please?
Well, I think that sustainable business models and energy transition will redesign the world we are accustomed to completely from the roots. I think that so also the concept of the capitalism that we have had until now would be completely changed after the next in the next 10, 15 years. I think we have the honor to be in positions in which we can drive one of the most important step ahead of humanity. And so I think so it's very relevant that the cooperation among us and that the governments and the politics will understood that this is something that is not only a slogan, that now is becoming actions, that no one will have to be left behind, because no one has to have fear to enter to such a revolution, because we know that for the world that will come these are the right things to do. Multinational companies have a big role in this. And under the institution, the Global Compact, the PRI, so I'm a proud co-chair of the CFO task force under the UN Global Compact, and we are working on the financial will that will support this transition. So all these institutions will have to work together. So sometimes I feel that some of us think they have the right solution instead of another one. I think that make all the things together, not saying that I have the final solution, but try to bring all together in this new field is very relevant. I'm proud, and I just think that the European Commission is doing the right thing now in keeping the track and to say, so now we want to have very, very tough target. Now they will, a big discussion will arise around this point, but it's not only to reach a sustainable world, there's also to reach a new technology, the technology and also new leadership in technology that will support the new world and the new way in which we will stay in the world, we will produce another. And finally, I think that also capitalism will have to be changed a little bit. It's not a shareholders capitalism, that we are entering in a stakeholder capitalism. And it's not only a little change in the world, it's a big, big change in the concept in which we do things. So these are my final message to the audience.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alberto. Unfortunately, I think it's getting close to the end, but we heard so many insightful comments from all of you today, but clearly engagement with all the stakeholders is key. And I think, Alberto, you mentioned about stakeholder capitalism, which is always a consistently important theme nowadays. So, yeah, I think, let me summarize quickly, but I think hearing from all of you, it is just clear that sustainable finance will play an even more critical role in the transition to net zero. So I hope everyone enjoyed today's session. There was a lot of valuable insights. And let me thank all of you, to the speakers, for participating and sharing your precious insights and experience with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.